Hey, how's it going, everybody? This is Coach Dark Holmes. This is Chris Dark, Coach Dark Holmes from the Full Court Media. And what we're looking for today is to talk about just what the hell happened to the Suns and where it went. And I got my boy Caleb in. We did our Suns preview, and we want to kind of get into what happened, because I mean there's been a lot of talk here in Phoenix, and obviously Caleb, you're not in town anymore, but I definitely want to get into it with you on what's your thoughts. And there's definitely a lot going on out there, and then even like to the point where a little bit about ownership, and because there's a sneaky interesting letter that came out, and I want to kind of dive into that. And then last, a lot of talk that probably DA is probably going to be traded, and if he is, what are some interesting trade things that you would like to see? What would you like to see back, and or what would you just like to see to the roster moving forward? Maybe it's nothing, or maybe it's a lot. So anyway, Caleb, let's go ahead and get started. And frankly, I'm just going to go ahead and start simply enough. Like, what do you think happened in that series when everything looked great, up 2-0, up 3-2, and then all hell broke loose?
Sure, Coach. I don't know if I'm going to be your best guest tonight because I have a very simplistic answer on what I think happened. I think the Suns were rolling 2-0. I think we were getting very close to seeing a lot of the Luca thief, Rob, looter in a riot tweets coming out that people used to give to Devin Booker. That was on its way. And then game 3 came along, and that's the game that is hardest to win, right? You're up 2-0. The other team's playing with desperation, in this case the Mavericks, and that one just got away from them. I'm okay with that. Like, that was how I expected the series to go. I think the series was lost in game 4. I really do. And I think what happened is, and I don't know that we'll ever know exactly when, but Chris Paul was obviously not himself. And I thought you actually saw that at the very end of game 2, which is surprising because he went off in game 2.
Right.
And there was with about 5.5 to play, he asked himself out of the game. Now, nothing was made of it. Suns won easily, and I think everyone was just like, "Oh, what great job, Chris Paul." I think John Hollinger wrote the article right after that he's been the MVP of the postseason so far. When's the last time you remember Chris Paul asking out of a game?
What's interesting? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I don't remember it. That was, partially rhetorical, but this is just to build a little bit. I think that was maybe the point where it was like, oh my gosh, he's worn down. Like, we rode him a little too hard in the Pelican series. He's worn down. And so they dropped the game 3. That's the desperate team. Game 4 is the one that I feel like they had to win and should have won. That was the game the Mavericks go berserk from 3, shooting variance. We obviously saw last night that they don't do that every night, right? Actually, if you look at something interesting from game 1 of the Western Conference Finals, the Mavericks should have beat the Warriors last night in shot quality. They took better shots. So it's really interesting. They just missed them last night. They didn't miss them in game 4. They made those shots. Chris Paul had the 3 fouls that probably weren't ever fouls. They fouled out and barely played in the second half. And they were right there, 4-point game late, and that wasn't to be. And I feel like they never completely rebounded from that. I think whatever is ailing him was in full effect by then. And when you don't have your both cogs in the wheel, and you're playing a top 10 defense with a lot of athletic bigs, athletic wings that can trap, then I think that's where it all was lost in game 4.
What's interesting, you brought up game 2, and it's great analysis by you, because what most people don't realize is after Chris Paul takes himself out, Devin Booker comes in. Now, Devin Booker was on the bench for most of that little stretch that Paul went off. And then Booker comes in and hits like 3 straight threes in a row, and then that's game. And so it was interesting that you brought that up, because that's something that's not brought up a lot, simply is he took himself out. But because Book came in and just got hot right away, and then it was like 3-3-3 alley-oop to Bridges, if I'm not mistaken, or alley-oop to Cam, then at that point it was like, okay, we're good to go, and no one really thought about it. There has been a lot of talk here about Chris Paul and an injury, and was he healthy, and all those types of things. Here's my issue with Chris Paul on this. If he was legitimately injured, and he couldn't do what he needed to do, like him being in at the end of the game on game 7 when we're down, 45, was interesting. Like the fact that he was trying to get buckets in game 7 And that whole game 7 was a farce. And I agree with you on games, on game 4. 4 is the one you had to win. We come home, win game 5. I don't think Dallas played real well.
Yeah, that was really just a 1/3 quarter too. And remember they controlled most of the first half somehow. The Suns had a late run in quarter 2 and snuck out of there with a 3-point halftime lead. But that was all Q3. And I mean, Luka was turning the ball over left and right. That was not a norm. That was an aberration to a certain extent.
8 minutes. It was 8 minutes of And, so I mean, looking back, you can see the writing on the wall. I think what's interesting is, and I think this is where I want to kind of get to a little bit is, we'll get to Paul and Booker here in a second, but Monty Williams, and I'm a big Monty Williams guy. At the end of the day, the fact that he would not adjust and go small earlier was pretty frustrating, from the simple fact that I know what you talked about last night with the idea that Golden State, they missed shots against Golden State. Yeah, I also think the Golden State matches up much better with Dallas because they are automatically small. We'll get into DA in a little bit too as well, but sure. the fact that matchup was a nightmare for the Suns because they just couldn't match up to that 5 out, and DA put him in a tough spot, and then the fact that Paul seemed to be a little bit stubborn wanting to have Luka Doncic, which to me that's still, you look back in those games and they for whatever reason, either we didn't make that adjustment to get Paul off of Doncic, or, we all know Chris Paul is a prideful player and he might have wanted Doncic, but that they had open looks after open looks more. And I think a lot of that 5 out and us going with DA, on the defensive end, it really hurt us being able to close out on those shooters.
Well, a lot to unpack there. First off, I do disagree with the idea that Chris Paul wanted Luka Doncic. I don't think that was the case. I think he's prideful, but I don't think he's dumb. I
agree.
So that I think that here's my question for you. Instead of just giving you an answer, my question is, well, I agree with a lot of what you said. What would have been the changes to make? I think the Suns kind of just ran out of personnel to a certain extent, unless you have something. Now, I'm not talking about like how you guard Luka. There's lots of different things there. I mean, in terms of going small, who's playing, that kind of thing. What would have you done?
Well, I would have played, and they did this against the Spurs earlier in the year, but I would have gone a little bit more Ish Wainwright at the 5. He could still dive. And again, he's not any of our bigs, but he could still dive to the rim. But again, if you look at what he did against the Spurs, they went small earlier in the year against the Spurs, and he did play that 5 and dove to the rim. It would have been interesting to just see how that matchup would have gone if we would have gone small. The issue is, you're right. We had a little bit of flex. We had a little bit of roster inflexibility, I guess, for lack of better words. The guy we needed, believe it or not, was the guy we traded for Torrey Craig, which we needed Jalen Smith. He would have been a really good player to have for this series.
I thought you were going to say the guy we needed was Dario Saric,
Well, I would have been fine with Dario as well, but I think
what's interesting. I mean, not to play too much Monday morning quarterback here, but Dario Saric gets hurt game 1 against the Milwaukee Bucks. Like, can you make an argument if he doesn't get hurt? The Suns win last year and are still playing this year. I mean, that's the spread. That's the small line. That's the 5. The spread, the floor 5.
Yeah. Here, hold on. We have a comment. I want to just go ahead and pop up. It just says, Coach, do you think Monty didn't go small because he was afraid of getting crushed on the offensive boards? You know what, Don, I'm not going to say I disagree with that. But at the end of the day, and I appreciate you tuning in, at the end of the day, probably, but shit, you can only get killed from 3 for so much. That our roster was, here's, we could go into this all in all. At the end of the day, our bench was awful. Campaign was terrible all series long. Monty didn't feel good about going to Aaron Holiday. Torrey Craig basically gave up more straight line drives than a poor high school basketball player. And so at the end of the day, Craig was supposed to be that last defender that to kind of go in between Bridges and Crowder. You're right. There's only some place for him to go, but I do think that Dallas is good. I think the Warriors win this next series, but I also think it's because it's a matchup. And basketball has always been a game of matchup. I know a lot of people really wanted the Jazz. Wanted the Mavs over the Jazz. I totally disagree. I think the Jazz would have been a much better matchup.
Well, I mean, a couple things. First off, I do agree the Jazz would have been a much better matchup. I also got to, I mean, I got to call myself out here. I thought this was a great matchup for us, simply because I did think that they were going to be able to assert their dominance with DA. I did think that they were going to be able to own the offensive rebounding and turn them over enough. And those things didn't really happen. I mean, a little bit of the offensive rebounding, there were spurts there. But it was, I was just wrong. I think a lot of people were with me on this. The Mavs were a very difficult matchup. So, it's one of those tough things to say. One of the things that I think is really interesting, though, is one of the reasons I think a lot of prognosticators took the Suns in this series and took them overwhelmingly, despite their regular season record, is they were supposedly the deeper team.
Correct.
That did not play out at all,
No,
right?
not at all.
Not even close. They got hammered in terms of depth. And one thing that I think is really interesting is we had Elfrid Payton on the Suns, right? Didn't play. The Mavericks brought out Frankie Ntilikina, Frankie Smokes. Not only played, but held, I believe it was 3 of 40 when he was guarding Chris Paul and Devin Booker. 3 of 40 from the field. Where were both of those guys last year? The New York Knicks. Could have had either one. Had either one.
Well, and look, I'm a James Jones guy, but I completely disagree with, and at the time I did as well. I didn't want to get rid of Jalen Smith for peanuts. And he constructed this roster. I mean, in my opinion, he constructed this roster to go against the Milwaukee Bucks. And it was a really good roster to go against the Bucks because we need, what did we hear constantly? We needed to get bigger. We needed to get more physical against Giannis and Giannis. And the problem is that who do we play? A bunch of teams that went 5 out.
Right.
So it's just like, it's one of those things where, you just, I think moving forward, I think if James Jones does anything that I want to see is I want to see a little bit more roster flexibility where we can go 5 out and we can also go with a big. And I think, as we move forward a little bit, I just want to put a bow on this series a little bit before we kind of talk about ownership and where they go forward. And Paul, let's just call it like it is. Paul was shitty and he was bad for 4 straight games. And yes, he might have been hurt, and there's probably a possibility he probably was at some degree. But man, if you're on the floor and you're not putting yourself on the injury report, you just, at the end of the day, you got to play better. And you can't just be able to trap book. And just, I mean, CP3 just wouldn't shoot a 3. Like, he was wide open and he wouldn't shoot it.
Again, though, I don't disagree with you. I think that is not a Chris Paul issue. I think that is a personnel issue. I think that's more of a, James Jones or whatever you want to say thing. Yeah, I mean, I know everyone's talked about, well, they should have gave up a first for Eric Gordon, but I do think, and maybe this is a good transition point into what's ahead, I'm totally fine with Chris Paul. I'm the opposite of the guy stomping on the jersey. Like, he has done a lot for the Suns organization, and I think will continue to do a lot for the Suns organization. He just needs to be in a different role for us moving forward. Needs to be no more than the third option. Fourth option would be wonderful, right, on offense. Need to just barely play 22 minutes a game if you have to and save 8 of them for the fourth. I don't know what it is exactly, and that goes down to some interesting roster construction. But he's only getting older, and I do think he's got those 14 for 14, maybe not that exactly, but he's got those games left in the tank. He just wore out. They needed a third guy, and they didn't have it.
No, they didn't. And we all love Mikhail. We all love Cam. We all love the guys. And look, I mean, I thought the Suns would win in 7, and I caught hell on social media for it just for
I had
people
5.
thought it was going to go 7. Look, I mean, we'll get into DA here in a second. I thought it was, I mean, and Caleb, me and you have disagreed, which is always kind of fun a little bit. DA never plays well against small people. And so they push. I mean, but I didn't see that matchup going the way everyone thought it would. I was hoping, but let's get into something different a little bit, and that's the Suns ownership. And so what I think is funny is this just kind of popped up a little bit. So I'm going to share the screen here with this little note. And what's interesting is most of people got this, most like season ticket holders, and it was on Twitter and things like that, moving forward about the Suns in the season, and we're moving forward, and we're going to do all the things, and yada, 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 yada. Now, the interesting part about that, I mean, you have talked about it, is the signatures on the bottom. Mm-hmm. And the person that's missing on that is Robert Sauber.
Yeah, Jason Rowley's there instead.
Right. And so it's pretty interesting to kind of read between the lines. Most people know what's going on with the investigation and things like that. And you brought this up. just kind of, me and you were talking before we were talking about what we're going to, kind of prepping for the stream a little bit. And you mentioned who you saw in the seats in Game 7, which was who?
So not in the same seats. And everything that I'm saying here is just my personal opinion. I don't know anything. This is just my own two eyes. But I do think it's interesting that, immediately after the Sarver investigation starts, he's removed from any type of videos, promo videos, and it's kind of been a furthering distance as we've gone along. Multiple times we've had, and hopefully I pronounce his name right, but Jam Najafi, who's a minority owner in the Suns, but is worth far more money than Robert Sarver is, sitting courtside. He was courtside for Game 7, and he sits next to kind of, if you like look where like the TNT table is, or the broadcasters, he sits there. Sarver sits in the corner, closest to I guess the basket that the Suns usually defend in the second half. That was flipped in Game 7.
Yeah, nice, kind of like by Fitz and all that.
Yeah, so he usually sits right by exactly Larry Fitzgerald. I didn't see him in Game 7. I didn't see him, and I was specifically looking for him there. I didn't see him in game 2 or 5 either. Now that doesn't mean he wasn't there, and he could have been somewhere in the arena watching too. But especially on a Game 7, that's the first Game 7 in for the Suns since 2006. Mark Cuban was there every single game, regardless. So
right.
Sarver definitely has been missing from some games. He was not signed on the letter here. My theory, and who knows what will happen, but of course, and we know about the bank, right? He's no longer a partner at Bank of Arizona or whatever, sold his stake. So you add those things up. My theory is that we may have already come to a resolution, and it's the NBA is just withholding that announcement until after the finals, potentially after the NBA draft, when they kind of close the book on the 2021-22 season. And they've got multiple buyers lined up. I think Jam Najafi would probably be the first shot at it. I believe, just off the top of my head, it's somewhere around $3 or $4 billion he's worth. So more than enough to right. successfully run and own a sports franchise. And then on a smaller note, and this is probably just rumor, but we've heard about Bob Iger too, the former CEO of Disney, which I think would be a lot of fun. Now he's worth far less actually than Jam Najafi, but either way, I do think that there could be a change, and that he's going to go off on to whatever retirement he's looking forward to, and the Suns could be under new ownership next year, in my opinion.
If he does, if and again, this is all speculation. We're just kind of playing, reading between the lines. But like, he's going to make Sarver's going to make a ton of money. So at the end of the day, he's making a ton of money on this. But here's what's interesting. So there's been a lot of talk, especially here in town, about DA and all these different things of where this thing is going. But it seemed like if you're just kind of throwing things together, did DA's camp know that this was going on? Is the new ownership that's that maybe not is involved, is a pro DA or anti DA? And if it is anti DA and their camp knew that, is that why there's been some more rifts lately? There's just so much to unpack that we don't know. There's been so much talk and rumors about, who was this and who was that. Look, we know that we know the chemistry wasn't good at the end. Why? Did the ownership have anything to do with it? That's going to be a fun story as we move forward the next month or two, is where does the ownership go, and where does the ownership want to do? Do they want to spend money? Are they fine going into the luxury tax, or, what do we want to do with it? I'm excited if we get a new owner, just because I'd like to see someone be willing to spend a little bit more money. And frankly, Sarver just made a lot of enemies in even the league and the owners. It'd be nice to just have someone that has a clean slate with the rest of the owners in the league and the commissioner, and just kind of a breath of fresh air would be nice.
So, the Suns are playing with a couple of hands tied behind their back before the season even starts, just because of who runs the team. And that's just is what it is. And I don't know him personally. Don't want to comment on any of that because I obviously don't know. But just from a basketball decision-making standpoint, and this, goes back to buying your draft picks and selling them away, the Rajon Rondos, the Luol Dengs of the world, when you were so close to winning a title, not paying Joe Johnson, whatever it is, there's the
Joe Johnson thing. No, right. Joe Johnson. God,
well, it just only continues, right? And
right.
So all off the court stuff, and there's a lot of that too. But just from a basketball decision-making standpoint, a reset button would do really well for the Suns, and I think that the thing that obviously anytime ownership changes hands, the thing you worry about is like, well, will the team move, that type of thing. I don't think there's any kind of worry there. I think the market is, I mean, it's fifth the largest market in the nation in terms of population size now. Obviously, it's been around. Franchise has been around for 50 plus years. Recent success, long term success. So I don't think there's any worry about that. Well, I mean, the Seattle SuperSonics may have a word or two, but I think I would be fully comfortable with a change in ownership.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's get into something a little bit more fun.
Sure, I thought that was fun.
Yeah, well, I mean, getting rid of Sarver would be. I mean, look, let's be honest, it'd be tremendous.
Well, and the other thing, and one last thing before we move on, and maybe this is actually a segue, but if a new ownership group comes in, what usually happens? They want to put their stamp on it immediately,
Correct.
Right? And the Suns, right? And they still, I mean, I think everyone's concern is, did the window just shut? But if you have someone ready to make a move, maybe they extend that window. Maybe they make a really bold play. So maybe that's a conversation to consider.
Well, at the end of the day, too, and I agree. And look, every owner. I mean, look at the gentleman that bought the San Diego Padres. What did he do? He bought damn near the whole league, because he wants to compete with the Dodgers. So, I mean, I agree. Someone's going to want to come in there and immediately start to win, and that is a good segue to what we were talking about, which is just the idea of where they're going to go. DA's probably out. So what do you want to get for him? And then more importantly, how much in the tax are you willing to go? And obviously someone that's worth $3, $4, $5 billion, where they don't care about the luxury tax. They just want to win, obviously is going to be interesting. So here's a couple names that I'd like to throw at you and a couple theories.
Okay.
Don, I'm going to get to you, buddy. I appreciate, all the different comments on it. And we're going to get to you here in just a second. Obviously for me, the thing that has to change a little bit, and I think we all like them, is, Jay Crowder and DA are probably not going to be back next year. And if it's Crowder, then maybe it's a roll. And so now you have to come up with the concept is it going to be Cam Johnson that's going to slide in there at the 4, or do you need to get bigger? My thing is, I love Cam coming off the bench. And I'm a big Cam Johnson fan, and he did not play well at the end of the year. He just could not come back from that injury. There's two names that I'm a huge fan of, and if we can get DA for him, and if we even have to give up a draft pick, even though we tend to do that most of the time anyways, I'd be a big fan. Is number one, I'd love to get Pascal Siakam. And I know these are, some people might think, well, these are a pipe dream. Well, let's couple things. Number one, Toronto knows that they're going to eventually have to pay him the max, and they're going to pay Scotty Barnes. And it's either Siakam or Scotty Barnes, and they're probably going to pay Scotty Barnes when it's all said and done. And so I could see simple enough that they might be willing to if you could package, and not that we want to get rid of Cam, but if you package Cam and Ayton, or even, I mean, obviously we'd love to just say, hey, let's just go with Ayton and Crowder and a draft pick. Would that be enough? And it may not be, but again, they're not gonna pay Siakam the max or the super max, even if he makes top 3 of the teams. So I think that's an interesting play, because that is a bucket getter, and it's absolutely what you were talking about, that they have to have a legitimate third option. And I'd like for that third option to be a power forward, because Jay Crowder's 6'6". And I mean, a lot of people think that Jay's like 6'8". Jay Crowder's 6'6" and has done an amazing job at 6'6". That position has to get bigger right off the bat. And then my second is simply, I'd like to see Jamari Grant, and I'm a huge Jamari Grant guy. He averaged
Jeremy Grant.
Yeah, Jeremy Grant. He averaged almost 20 a night. Now he doesn't get the rebounds that Siakam does, and he's not the playmaker, but Grant is a bucket getter, and he can, I think that would be a huge upgrade at that position, because simply enough, I think we can get a big to roll to the basket. I mean, if you look at some of the free agents out there, the Clippers big is out there. Portland's big is out there. Again, you have to go into luxury tax for it, but I think they would fit a role. But I would love to see us get bigger at the 4 position. I know we got to address the backup point guard, either a combo guard. Our wings need to get bigger. There's a lot of things we need to do, but what do you think of those two names?
Well, I mean, there's a lot there. So first off, I got to start off with, I don't know if I'm all the way with you on see you later, Ayton and Jay. I don't know. I mean, I think it's way too early to say. It's going to be difficult to get good value for DeAndre Ayton. And I think your Pascal Siakam one, that'd be fantastic. And I think that's something that maybe would have had more legs last year, or had they signed DA to an extension already. I think the sign trade thing could be more difficult, and I don't know if that'll work. We'll see. And then Jay, I mean, absolutely, if there's an opportunity to upgrade the position, they'll go for it. But it's easier said than done, right? And worst case scenario, he is an expiring at the trade deadline. He's an expiring contract, that comes off the books next year. So we'll just have to see. I definitely like, as far as your options, I definitely like Siakam a lot more than I like Jeremy Grant. For me, Grant, it would be, well, for one, he's already said he wants to be the number one guy, which to me, it makes no sense. Like, he wants to leave Detroit because Cade Cunningham's there. And he's already, asked himself out of Denver when they went to the Western Conference Finals, bubble Jim Murray. So I'm actually okay passing on that. I think he would be too expensive, and I don't know that he's shown enough to me to think that that's going to be the guy that gets him over the hump.
Okay.
And this is not great content, but I don't have any answers other than, I mean, for me, I just don't. Like, what I will say is, to me, if the Suns really wanted to go into a win now mode, I think the idea of like putting all your chips on the table and trading for a veteran superstar actually could make sense. And I know that everybody that probably is watching this knows Flex from Jersey and what he posted out there. Who knows? I mean, he's been right before, but I actually think it could make sense. I mean, Chris Paul's window is now, maybe 6 more minutes from now. I don't know. It's like maybe it was 6 minutes ago. Maybe it's over. But the fact of the matter is they still got to try and do everything they can to win right now. I could see them doing that. I think you have intriguing pieces with Cam. I mean, Mikhail's on the table for me. Like, that could happen. I don't want it to happen. It could happen. The DA part is hard. I think if it's me, like, and I'm not an Ayton guy at all, but I'm almost ready just to, unless there's something out there that I'm just going to be surprised by, I'm okay with just bringing him back. Like, he's still 24. And listen, I promise you, I probably like Ayton less than you do.
But I doubt it. You realize he went to U of A, right? Like, you are aware of that. Like, that's already one negative for me.
What's that?
He went to U of A. Like, you realize that, like, he walked in as a negative for me.
I got you. Okay, fair enough. Well, I mean, obviously, there's a lot of things going on there that we won't dive into. But he's still, I mean, he's 24, and he did show promise. But who knows? Like, it's either for him, we're moving on, and I want to be the best player on a team, or I want to be the second best player on a team. And is that likely where we're going? Probably. But the other scenario is, hey, you know what? I'm going to learn from this, and I'm going to be the person. I'm going to continue to grow. There's a ceiling for me because he can't create, he can't dribble, he's not going to be like Joel Embiid or Karl Anthony Towns on offense. That being said, like, I just don't know what the value is going to be for him out there. So we'll see. But for me, to put my thoughts on the boat, for me, the primary thing more than anything else, as much as I'd love Kevin Durant and being a 4, like, being realistic, is just the third guard. I think it has to happen. And I think they thought they had that in campaign. But I think it has to happen with the offense that they run, and if you're going to, unless you just give up on Chris Paul and reset, I think you have to have it.
Well, I'm gonna throw this out there because I've been waiting to give this one. It's long,
Sure.
But I want to give Don a second. It's just, to tie the Chris Paul and DA talk together. Chris Paul's value was in making DA more competitive as a point guard. Should he be able to do that with even scoring 2 points a game? Was him making it a tough series? Look, Don, here's my thing on that, and this is my issue with DA is, people you can look at stats however you want to look at stats. I thought Chris Paul just couldn't get the spots. Now, is that age? Is that being able to just not get to where he wanted to go due to an injury? Chris Paul has made any money that DeAndre Ayton has made is because of Chris Paul. You look at those stat lines and they're 10 for 13. And everyone's like, oh my God, this wasn't Chris Paul's fault. This wasn't DA's fault. Yeah, look where those shots are. Those shots are all created by usually our guards at the rim or driving baseline and kicking for a little, shot at the elbow. So, Don, I don't think so, buddy. I think his value is still very high. I'm still high on Chris Paul. I just think simple enough, and thanks for the comment and watching. I think at the end of the day, we got. I agree with you with the third guard. There's so many things that we need, unfortunately, but the third guard to give Chris Paul a break would be massive. And it has to be done. I will, like I said, I will completely disagree with you on DA. I think DA's ceiling is what it is. And really, some of it's not even his fault. It's just kind of where the league is.
Oh, absolutely. Totally agree with that.
I mean, if DA was a power forward, this is a whole different conversation. or if he was a wing, if he was a 6'7" wing, this is a different conversation. But the fact that he's a center, and like you mentioned it, unless you're Embiid or the Joker or you're even Cat, and I wouldn't even give max money to Cat, but unless you're one of those guys, what?
Yeah, I believe he's already got the max money, right?
I just said I don't know if I would have.
Sure.
But with that being said, at least he's a 3-point shooter. He stretches it out. He is the stereotypical like stretch five with those other guys. I just don't think at this point the league is not for a max. Now look, don't get me wrong. Let's say, and this isn't going to happen. Let's say DA's camp's like, look, we'll take Bridges' money. We'll take the same contract. Now, again, this isn't going to happen, but we'll take the same contract that Bridges has. All right, well, let's go bring it back. Like to me, that's a whole different ballgame. When you start talking about max money, then that's where I'm done with DA. But if he wants to come into a smaller contract, I have no problem whatsoever bringing him back on a smaller deal, because if you're going to get a top 10 center, you're going to be paying anywhere from 10 to 15 million a year anyways. If DA wants to come back for 17 million a year, cool. I'm fine with that. The max money, and I do think his market will be very high for what you just said. He's young, he's athletic,
very athletic.
Look at stats. I think we'll actually be able to get
looks
really
like a great
top
guy
value for him. I can't wait to see. I mean, look, this season was so fun and everything that went with the season. And me and you obviously are big fans. And the idea that it wasn't supposed to end that way. It just, however it was going to end, it sure as hell wasn't that way. But now that we're past it, I mean, I don't know like how many levels of grief there are. I think I'm on like stage 3. But at the end of the day, I'm so intrigued to see what's going to happen with the ownership. I'm really, really intrigued to see where they're going to go with the roster management. I know James Jones was on the radio a couple mornings ago and he said that he needs bucket getters. Yes, I agree. I think he needs length. I think putting Bullock on Booker was a sneaky good move by Kidd because he's long, he's athletic, and he locked him down. Like you said, they had guys that were all 6'6", 6'7". I mean, that really hurt us. If you look at our guards, they're all tiny. I mean, Book's 6'5", and that's fine. But I mean, people compare us to Golden State. Golden State, like Thompson and Poole are 6'7". Like it's a whole different ballgame.
If I could, I just want to weigh in with what Don asked real quick, just because I've defended Chris Paul a lot on this show, and because I think he's human, and I think he got them as far as they did, even though it ultimately fell short. But to his point, and I don't know if this happened, but to his point, he fell out of favor in New Orleans. People got tired of him with LA. His teammates didn't want to be there with him in Houston anymore. He's only there at Oklahoma City once for 1 year, so that's fine. But I mean, he's a difficult person our player, I should say, on the basketball court, and it's well documented. So, I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm not saying he's right, but I'm not saying he's wrong. You never know. Yeah,
you're right. And then last one here that Don brought up, which is interesting in terms of where the league is. None of the 4 teams have a true guard or a true center. The 2 things the 4 teams have is guys that can shoot and defend. Yeah, Don. I mean, obviously, Bam Adebayo is one that you could say is a kind of a quasi true center. But you're right.
To his point, he's
right.
He can dribble and do a lot. Yeah. Yep.
I totally agree with that. And again, thanks, Don. And again, that's where the league is. You got to be able to put pressure on the defense in so many different ways. And maybe, I mean, yes, there's talk down here that, Chris Paul, we had some technical difficulties, that Chris Paul, was tough to deal with. And, him and Monty got into it. And, where did that go? And who knows where all that stuff lies, but
I think that's fine. I'm not worried about that.
Yeah, I'm not either. But it goes back to what you and Don were talking about, which is like, is he a 2-year or 3-year window guy? And then you just like, you know what? Thank you for everything. You've been amazing. You brought the culture up. You've made Devin Booker better. I'd like to maybe do another stream where we talk about how the Suns need to stop hunting for fouls. And I think they learned that a little bit from Chris Paul, instead of just go play and stop worrying about fouls. But that's a whole nother segment for a whole nother show. But let's go ahead and wrap this up a little bit. We've gone a little bit longer than I wanted to go. And I appreciate your time. You got the young kid at home and one on the way. So I appreciate the time, but just kind of putting everything into a boat. The next month and a half is gonna be interesting. We don't have a draft pick. So again, that's an issue. We traded that for Landry Shamet and lots of different things. So, I think at the end of the day, where we go in the next 2 or 3 months, do we go big like, Flex from Jersey? We all love Flex from Jersey. Is he right? Do we go Durant? I don't want LeBron. I'll be the first one. I do not want LeBron James on our team. I don't want Damian Lillard. The last thing we need is another shooting small guard. But I would be all in on Kevin Durant. I'd be all in on Zach LaVine. So like there's a few that I would, like you said, if we're gonna go big, let's, that would be tremendous. In your dream scenario, and I'll let you end on this dream scenario, big name, like don't worry about who we have to trade. Don't worry about, luxury tax. What big name would you love to have?
Oh gosh. I honestly haven't.
I mean, that's realistic.
That is realistic. I mean, that's where I'm saying, like, I don't have a lot of answers because I don't know what it looks like for me. I mean, if you said I was dreaming, it would be Kevin Durant, just like you. Your Siakam one was a nice call, but the thing is I like watching basketball games. Like I like watching the team work. I don't like the team building part because it rarely works out. Yeah. It's very hard to get it right. Even all of the moves in the world that, the Nets are a great example of this. Is like, hey, put them into as Eastern Conference favorites, whatever, put them in as NBA Finals favorites. Like, it is difficult.
Yep.
So I'm going to go ahead and abstain from the question, except for to say, well, I'm not the biggest fan of his, and I'll take Michael Jordan any day. I can't sit here being recorded and say, I don't want LeBron James. If he wants to come to Phoenix, welcome.
Yeah, we will politely disagree on that.
Sure, for the record, but I would be confident that he would contribute.
Well, I'm not going to say that. He definitely would contribute. I will say that in honor of my wife, obviously the Stark household, my wife does not want Cam Johnson to be traded in any scenario. So she wanted to make sure that I definitely put that out there. That Cam has to stay in some form or fashion. Look, if we can get a big name, Cam.
Sure, yeah,
Cam's got to go. Caleb, I appreciate it, my man. Thanks for all the time tonight. We'll get back at this as we get closer to the season. Thanks for.
And I think everyone deserves a nice break. So
absolutely.
First and foremost, the players.
Take care, bud. Thanks.
See ya.
Hey guys, it was nice just to kind of sit and not, just talk sports a little bit and have some fun and just kind of get our minds off it. Next stream will be a little bit more real estate related, but sometimes you just got to not talk about real estate and just have some fun talking about basketball. Hey guys, have a wonderful night. Be safe. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.